Welcome to the Movers Resource Guide podcast, connecting you to the resources you need to create success. We chat with the best vendors, associations, mentors, movers, and more, giving you the information you need to create success. I'm your host, Brian Hassan, CEO of Wayfinder Moving Services in Buffalo, New York, Apex Moving in Lakewood, Washington, and the president of the New York State Movers Association. Today, our guest is my good friend, AJ Schneider, president of Wheaton Worldwide Vanlines, the Wheaton Beacon system. We had a great conversation today. We talked about the state of the industry from a COD moving and residential moving perspective, and also from a global household goods contract perspective. He had a crazy moving story in there. And since AJ's from Buffalo, we talked a little bit about buffalo wings too. So AJ Schneider's a great guy. We had a fun conversation, maybe going a little bit longer this time, but I think it's worth it. So here's my conversation with AJ. I hope everyone enjoys. All right, AJ, welcome to the Movers Resource Guide podcast. Glad to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. This will be fun.
Yeah, so excited to have you on. Obviously, you have a lot of knowledge about the moving industry, and there's a lot of turmoil right now, a lot of difficult things from a government moving perspective, a lot of difficult things from a economic perspective, especially for the housing in our industry. So there's a lot of people nervous right now in the industry, a lot going on. So I thought it'd be really great to bring you on and get the big brain van line guys over here to say, hey, what the heck is going on and what should we expect in the future here? So really excited to have this conversation. And I guess one of the first things we want to start off with was, what do you see is in our next 12 months or in our future for the COD side of the moving business?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious to all of us who are involved that we're tied so tightly to the economy and most specifically the housing market. And that's really, when we talk about it here, that's really where we focus that conversation. I don't think that's unique. And I'm going to take kind of an optimistic, semi-optimistic approach to the answer. I mean, I don't think there's any question 2023 been a tough year for volume, driven largely by the high interest rates that folks are experiencing and the decision making that they do based on what that's going to cost them if they were to buy a home, and maybe opting out of doing that or deciding to rent or whatever it is that they're going to do. But I do think that as we move into the next 12 months, we're already seeing not huge signs, but some signs that interest rates are going down a little bit, a smidge. And that when you look at the upcoming year, if you look at it in terms of probability, that it is more likely as time has gone on that interest rates will in fact start to be cut as we go into the next year. So I think that's good news for everybody. I'm not in a position to predict like how much that's going to be. But I think we'll all take what we can get, right?
It's nice to see that they're stabilizing at least, right? They stopped increasing them. So that's a solid sign. I hope that they would reduce a little bit. And I think we're never going to see the interest rates that we were seeing. But, if we can get mortgage interest rates into the 5 or 6 range, I would hope that people will start purchasing again.
And, when you talk about the number 6 or even 7%, I mean, I think, we as human beings have very short memories. And the current mortgage that I have, I'm one of those people who's in that 4% range. I think they said something like 60% of all existing mortgages are in that 3 to 4%. And that's what makes it so egregious to think about going from 4, let's say, or 3 to 7 or 8, if you were going to sell your house and buy a new one. But I think we forget that it wasn't that long ago that we were at 7%. And
Yeah.
so it's really that combination of the interest rate and the pricing. And that's the other piece of it, is that depending on the market, uh, pricing is starting to come down a little bit too. In certain
Yeah.
areas, that's not the case, but
Yeah.
I think there's some opportunity there.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I think people just need a minute to mentally adjust to the fact that this is the way it's going to be partially. Um, I mean, coming into an election year, things always get a little crazy, but hopefully that drives some lower pressure on those interest rates.
Yeah.
But so obviously that's the biggest thing that drives that change for us. With that in mind, compared to how 2020, let's talk about the volume of 2023. So would you expect that volume in 2023 to rebound to, let's give it a comparison year, let's say, are we looking back at 21, 22 in 24, or are we marginally better than 23? Like what are your thoughts? How do you think that might trend to change from a volume perspective?
Well, let's be clear on where we're going to compare. No, I don't think it's going to go back to the COVID period when things went crazy. In the second half of 2020 through 22.
Yeah.
Those were pretty banner years for everybody, driven
Yeah.
by very pronounced event that inspired people to get out of Dodge, I guess. But I think. So I don't think those are fair comparisons. So the way I would look at it is that we ought to be striving, at least in the short term, to get back to 2018, 2019 levels.
Yeah.
And so the question is, do I think we'll get back there in 24? I'm going to say no, but I think we're going to move toward that. I think
Okay.
that 24 will be marginally better than 23, and again, I think what we're looking for is progress, not perfection.
Yes.
And so I think that will be a boost for everybody.
Yeah.
But again, I think we have to take a step back and look the trend of mobility in the United States, excuse me, has been on the downtrend for a very long time.
Yeah.
So that's not a new thing. And again, I think we as humans, we forget, we get focused on something and we sort of forget the historical perspective.
Yeah.
Again, 20 and 2021, 22 are not. I don't think it's realistic to hold those out and say, okay, well, we're going to try and get back to there. I think those were anomalies, right? So if you take those out of the equation, the trend is really a downward trend. Not to be alarmist, but I mean that's where it was going.
Yeah.
So I think we also have to be realistic at where we're trying to get back to. So again, I'm cautiously optimistic about 24 going the right direction. How far that goes, I can't say, but it won't be the banner years.
Yeah, and I think what you're probably seeing the same thing I am, that I'm seeing a number of moving companies go out of business right now. So between last winter, the summer, I think this winter, I certainly don't expect any positive change before May for moving companies. We're going to struggle through the winter, and I would imagine that we'll continue to see the amount of competition to dwindle. And I don't know if you're seeing that in your, maybe not in your agent pool, but in the world at large. It seems to be, which I think is healthy for the industry. It's unfortunate and it's sad for those companies that are struggling. But if we're able to make it through this and come out the other side, I think that we will find. I'm hoping we'll find less competition, so that increases, even though the aggregate volume isn't there. At least we may have more of that market share, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think we've certainly identified over time that this is kind of the same things you are alluding to, that the consolidation of the industry has moved away from major van line purchases to more agent consolidation, right? So a larger agent buying a smaller agent, which, by the way, in and of itself, it is a great thing, because I think, as we all know, it's no secret that retiring from the moving business, if you've had a family-owned business that's been around for a very long time, I mean, it's a hard thing to do, to sell a moving company.
Yeah.
Let's say if you don't own your real estate or whatever the case is, it's hard to value those companies. And so I think that's a very good thing for folks who are at the maybe the end of their career and looking to retire, and they were wondering, how am I going to move on to the next chapter? Well, that's a great thing for those folks too. I think what we've seen, and we've been pleasantly surprised, that in fact, many agents, and again, I'll just from our network's perspective, that's really all I can speak to, are actually well capitalized, and so we've not seen the kind of that trend of folks, hanging up their spurs or going out of business because of the recent thing. I'm not saying they're not struggling. I'm not saying that folks don't have to think about other lines of business, but
right.
But we've been pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, and I think within the Wheaton Beacons network, you have some very mature businesses in there. So maybe some of the and I would say some of those really older businesses that are not changing are going to struggle and continue, but they have a little bit more of a lifeline attached to them, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But certainly there's those that aren't changing with the world that may not make it, but there's certainly those that have been around for a long time, have that backstop, I guess, to weather tough times, that are actually doing a great job too, and changing with the times. But some of these moving companies that have popped up since we got busy through COVID and all of that may wind up disappearing, as they haven't established their brand as well as other ones, and may fall by the wayside. So
I think that's true, and I think it within that, I think diversification is really a huge deal, right? And so the agents that have taken the time to think through that and say, okay, household goods, which of course we're all about, is maybe our primary business, but when things are slower on the household goods side, do we have other lines of business that can prop us up? FF&E, office and industrial work, et cetera, et cetera. Those companies that have thought through that, I mean, those are really, I think, smart folks who are going to do really well.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that too, because from a business perspective, I have friends that are across the gamut in the industry, right? But I'll walk into somebody's shop that only does local moving, nothing else, or only does military moving and nothing else. And the leanness of their operation, because they only have one set of paperwork, they only have one line of business, like everything is so streamlined. Walk in, I'm like, man, this is an efficient operation. Like when things are going good, you can make a lot of money that way.
Sure.
Conversely, right now, if you're only military and there's a brownout for a month and there's no work that month, or the military cuts, whatever, we'll get into that in a minute, but man, it hurts even worse when you're not diversified. So it's finding that balance between being diversified enough to weather challenges in whatever side of the business that you're working on, but also not being so diversified that you have to have a million processes that nobody remembers because you're not doing it often enough.
I've worked prior to working in the household goods industry. I've worked for a number of different companies in a number of different industries, and without fail, the companies that I worked for that didn't do well were the ones that had too many eggs in one basket. Yeah. And I think it's to your point. It's great when it's great, and it's really tough when things go south. And I think that should be a lesson for everybody. it may be painful to think about, starting a new line of business or, making an investment, which ultimately I think is what scares people, is the risk on the front end of investing money in X, business. But if you think it through and you do your research and your due diligence and you do it well, it can really pay dividends later, especially when things don't go well on the other lines of business.
Yeah. So last question on the COD side of things. And maybe I don't know if you're willing to share this or not, but I'm going to ask anyway.
Sure.
What the companies that you see that are maybe weathering the storm a little bit better than others right now, or maybe the ones that you think that are going to outpace the group over the next year, what are they doing? Or maybe whether it's a business line or something they're doing within their business, or what is there something that you're seeing that's maybe putting people ahead of the curve a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of an age-old cautionary tale. As you're well aware, I come from a strong sales and marketing background, and one of the things, again, both outside of this industry and within the industry, that has always been problematic is it's kind of like the diversification conversation.
Yeah.
When things are going great, people tend to take their eye off the ball when it comes to sales and marketing, right? Mm-hmm. So in other words, it's in our industry, it's the old saw. Well, the phone was ringing or not ringing, right? Yeah. And when the phone's ringing, to use an old form of technology to make my point, that's great, right? And you don't feel the need to spend money on advertising and marketing and public relations and media relations, all those kinds of things. Well, all of a sudden, things grind to a halt, and you haven't been doing the things that we all ought to be doing. And the next thing you know, your brand isn't out there. There's not awareness. And when you're fighting for a smaller pool of moves, at that point in time, the familiarity that a potential customer has with one brand over the other, that's going to make the difference. So to answer your question, I think the companies that are weathering the storm outside of the diversification conversation, all that are weathering the storm better and capturing maybe more of the market share than they might normally be used to, are the ones that are doing a better job with sales and marketing, particularly the marketing piece of it, right? And it's I'd like to say that within that there's some silver bullet that we could all grab onto. It's really, are you doing the basic blocking and tackling, or did you take your eye off the ball?
So when things... it's really interesting that you say that, because when things were really good during COVID, we may pulled back a little bit on, instead of sending a listing and a pending postcard, we just sent the pending postcard because things were happening so quick. And before COVID, we were really getting into doing a lot of senior moving and really pushing the office moving side of our business. And we were doing a pretty good job of diversifying ourselves. But when COVID came along, it was really hard to do and get in and build those relationships with the senior moving because they were so locked down and so protected. And then business was so good and there was so much coming our way that we didn't have to work hard for anything. And so we stopped working hard on maybe developing those relationships with senior moving or really pushing our brand as far as being an office mover. We still were doing the things to give ourselves visibility as a local mover or COD mover or whatever. But as things started to slow down, it's like, oh crap, we should have continued to press those things. But it's really hard as a business owner to continue to put money into advertising or push a certain line of business when you're just going to tell those people no anyway because you're too busy. So it's we had to very quickly step back and say, okay, what do we need to dive back into here? It's a great point.
Yeah, and it seems counterintuitive. I tell people this all the time. I think in our business we we have taken a very sort of reverse, sort of counterintuitive approach, right? If we worked in any other industry, right? If we were selling widgets, right, and we wanted to increase our sales, right?
Yeah.
We would want to make sure that the advertising that we did, that the marketing we did, the networking we did, we were doing at a time when the maximum number of people would see our widget and would have awareness of our brand, right? We tend to do in our business the exact opposite. What we do is when the most number of people are looking for a move, right?
Yeah.
In the middle of the summer.
Yep.
We ratchet back and we stop spending money and we stop doing effort because it comes in, right?
Yeah.
That's the busiest time of year. And from a financial perspective, you could argue if you didn't know any better, you could just looked at that in a little microcosmic way. You'd say, well, that makes sense. I'm gonna keep my powder dry until I really need to push it. The problem is that the audience dips by 3/4, when you go into the off peak. And so now you can spend a bunch of money in the off peak and maybe you will get a disproportionate share in a good way. You're going to get more than your share,
right.
Let's say,
yeah.
of the available moves, but it's a fraction of the number of people that are of eyeballs. We'll put it that way. A fraction of the eyeballs that are actually seeing your brand. And so I always use the analogy and people may want to throw things at me for saying this, but think about these exclusive restaurants, right, in New York City that have, like 5 tables. And there's a waiting list for 6 months to be able to get in, and only celebrities and so on get in. Not that we want celebrities as our clients, so maybe this is a bad analogy. But if you end up saying no because you can't move people because your capacity is tapped out during the peak season, I say so be it. I mean, they didn't have a bad move with you; they just didn't have a move with you, and their assumption is that you're so good. That's why it's so tough to get in with you, right? Yeah. I would rather have that problem than not build the brand when you actually have an audience to see it.
I think that's a really good point. And I think it's very intuitive because you're 100% right. That's absolutely what we do in this industry. We pull back in the peak and then we dump an unreasonable amount of money in the winter. And we've tried a few things in the winter where it's like, man, some of these paid leads from lead aggregators or pay-per-click or some of that stuff. And we track it and we know with our CRM and how everything comes in, this is exactly what we got out of the money spent. And it's never worth it. Like every time I do paid leads, every time I do pay-per-click, I look at the results afterwards and it's bad. It's bad. Yeah. It probably wouldn't be so bad in the summer, but I don't need it then,
Right. And that's the thing. We all do it, and I think it's because when we get to that point in time, we're looking like, okay, now we got to jam as much as we can through in the winter, which completely understandable. I mean, but I think if we take a step back and we look at sort of basic ideas about how to market a product or a service, in many respects, we tend to do it backwards. Yeah. And by the way, if I could, I'll throw out another thing that I think complicates all of our lives, and that's what you mentioned about, for example, like brokers or lead aggregators and so on. And I think I'll be very careful because we certainly do business with a whole variety of folks. However, it is not a secret, I think, that when you have a broker out there who is selling business directly to the consumer, that they then turn around and we take, through that process, that is not helping our brand. And in matter of fact, it's dangerous. I mean, there are brokers that collect money directly from the customer.
Yeah.
They don't own trucks. They don't participate in any aspect of the actual move itself. And so we get all of the negativity that might come from it and none of the positivity for building our brand along the way. And the customer, frankly, doesn't necessarily have a great customer experience. So I throw that out there because I think, to your point, whether it's buying leads or working with maybe brokers that we shouldn't, whatever the case is, that's something else to think about too. That's not necessarily helping us.
It also cranks down on, on your margins too. So, but hey, so we're getting a little heavy here. It's time to take a little break here. This is the point in the podcast where we like to, maybe a little past the point where we like to introduce a funny story. So I think you've come prepared for this. So let us know what you got.
All right. Well, I had to think long and hard about whether this particular story ultimately is funny. So I think it is. I'm going to preface it by saying nobody was permanently injured at the end of this story. Okay, so let's just keep that in mind.
Oh boy.
So we had a move a few years ago that wasn't going particularly well.
Okay.
And the agent who it was an off terminal move, it was a national account move, and the agent who booked it was in one city. We were here in Indianapolis, and the customer was in another city. And so we had organized a three-way call, so that we could talk to the customer about the concerns and so on. And the customer was getting a little hot and was getting a little aggressive. Okay. And finally, I had to stop the conversation and say, "Hey, I understand your concerns, but in order for us to have this conversation, we have to kind of tone it down a little bit." Which happens, Which happens, yep. And then all of a sudden, we kind of heard. I'm gonna simulate this with my glasses. We heard kind of a phone drop, and I said, "Hello," and the guy's wife picked up the phone, and she was distraught. And she said, "My husband just passed out and he's having a problem," and so on. Wow. And the agent on the other line, who's in the other city, says, I'm going to call 911. I'm going to call. I said, "You can't, they're in a different city. You can't call 911. She has to call 911. Everyone was all flustered. So she ends up, she hangs up, as she should. And she ends up calling 911 and her husband. So it was
legit. They weren't like making it up to try to like.
No, he was having a problem. And so the ambulance came and got him and so on. Well, I, of course, felt terrible about the whole thing. And, it was a very unfortunate situation, although I got labeled for a while as the killer because this happened while I was talking to somebody on the phone. And I ended up flying out to the location the next that weekend, actually. I think it was like on a Thursday. So I ended up flying out Friday night and got there Saturday morning and helped finish the move up and so on because I felt so bad about the whole thing.
Oh, man.
But again, he ended up, by the way, kudos to the movers because they're the ones that when they saw he was having a problem until the ambulance got there, they like took care of him and stuff.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But
did he have a heart attack then?
I think he did.
Wow.
Yeah, I think he did. But he ended up being okay. And the move didn't really go all that well even afterward. But we got everything taken care of, and at the end of the day, it worked out fine. But yeah, so again, I don't really know how funny that was, other than
it is a funny or crazy story, and so this would qualify in the crazy. You're disputing with a customer, and they have a heart attack on you. That's That's well, I have not heard that. I think one.
That, yeah, well, and I think that my coworkers around the building had a great deal of fun with that. Like I said, for the next few weeks.
Go easy on him.
Hey, Killer, how's it going? Yeah.
That's wild.
But again, he's fine. Everything was fine.
Moving stressful, like crazy things happen. It's a wild time. Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us.
I may regret sharing it with you.
No. I mean, I think it also shows the character of our industry too. You know, it is difficult. We do have difficult times. You move enough stuff, something's going to go wrong. Something's going to go off the rails. And my thing that I tell our guys is like, it's not whether or not we have a problem, because we're going to have a problem. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. We move enough stuff, we're going to break something. It's what do we do after the problem happens? Do we turn our backs and walk away? Or do we hop a flight and fly across country to do our best to try to make sure things go better for a customer who's struggling? And I think the good players in this industry will go to those extremes, and those are the people we want to promote and show off to the industry, and those are the stories we want out there, not maybe some of the other ones that our industry has to showcase.
Yeah, exactly.
So well, okay, time out. Before we go on to the GHC stuff, you're a Buffalo guy. So AJ and I, we hit it off right away because I'm in Buffalo. AJ's born and raised in Buffalo in Western New York. So since I've got a Buffalo guy on here, we'll spread love and give us before we get to the thing everybody's going to know. What is your favorite Western New York staple food?
Well, I mean, it's the chicken wings. I can't deny it.
All right.
I can't deny it. I mean, I don't know if people would want to hear a different answer, but I'm going to be pretty typical in that regard. It's that you can't beat them. You can't beat them.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly okay. But sometimes I wonder, is it the beef on wick? Is it the pizza logs? Is it, we got a few things over here.
Yeah.
So, all right. So favorite place in Buffalo to get your wings? Where's your
okay. So I thought about, I was thinking about this a little bit, and as you know, if you're from, if you live in the suburbs or whatever city you're in, versus a city, you may not be aware that like everything, like where I grew up in Buffalo on the north side, really, but I mean, all of Buffalo is like this. It's like a series of neighborhoods, right, that are almost self-contained, right, in the sense that you can leave your house, you can walk from your house, and you walk down the street, and there's restaurants and bars and stores and all that kind of stuff that within walking to grocery stores, whatever. And so I when I grew up, everyone their favorite place tended to be within that neighborhood that they were living in. And so I'm no different. Mine is a place on Hurdle Avenue called Bob and John's. Okay. And they make, in my opinion, the best pizza and wings around. Unfortunately, it's been years since I've been able to go, but to my memory, hands down, they were the best. And everyone's got their own. Like you'll hear Duff's a lot, you'll hear the Anchor Bar, you hear this, you hear that. But Bob and John's was mine.
The Anchor Bar has gotten the reputation. They've built the reputation. There is a battle between Anchor Bar and Duff's of who did invent the buffalo wing, but I think Anchor Bar is winning that battle. Man, I can't get on board.
You're not a fan? Not a fan of Anchor Bar?
I'm not. I hate to say it, but I'm just not. We take people to somewhere else or wherever. And my favorite wings. I'm originally from.
I was saying, are you a Duff's guy then?
More so than Anchor Bar, yeah. But okay. I don't mind. The one thing I was really, because we're from an hour and a half south of Buffalo originally. We live here now, but a lot of places in Buffalo don't have a lot of variety of wing flavors. They're still at the basics, And I like a Cajun medium type mix, and where I'm originally from. Taste of Pizza has an Old Dad's wing, which is kind of like it's a double dip Cajun medium, and it's fantastic. And
that sounds awesome.
There's a few places up here that have stuff like that. So and I live a block from Elmo's, which is always up there in the rankings, and their wings are pretty good too. So
yeah, one thing I will say is that as I've gotten older, like when we were kids in Buffalo, it was always like a macho thing to see how hot you could you could stand the wings, and till your lips would turn blue and stuff from the pepper. Yeah, I'm past that. Not that the wings are particularly good here in Indianapolis, but whatever they are, I am now a mild guy. That's how things have progressed.
Mild, all the way down to mild, huh? Okay.
Oh yeah. No, I don't. I'm too old to mess around with the hot stuff.
Fair enough. All right. Well, I appreciate you entertaining me, and maybe some people care, maybe some people don't, with the wing conversation.
Everyone cares about chicken wings. Come on.
There you go. We'll stick with that. All right. So with the negative time, I think that we have left now, but we'll get it. We'll get it in. Let's talk about GHC. So single source GHC, Home Safe Alliance. All different ways we use to describe the military going from 900 contractors down to one. And what do we think the effect is going to be on the industry? What's the future hold for the industry with the GHC? Would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I'm probably a little limited in what I can get into, but I'll say this: let's tie that question, if we can, back to the kind of where we started talking about what does the future hold for next year and maybe beyond.
Yeah,
I think there's a great deal of concentration right now on, as it relates to GHC with, pricing and the labor regulations that go along with it, IT, how IT is going to work, all that kind of stuff. And as it should be, people are vetting that process and deciding if they, want to be part of that and participate and so on. And everybody's going to have to make their own decision on that. Yeah. What I would say, though, is I think from all the information that we've gathered, I think it would be very unlikely that there would be a significant implementation of GHC anytime before third quarter of next year. And even that, I think they're not, I don't see how they could go from, we'll say a small implementation or a test implementation at that point to, doing everything through GHC. So depending on where you fall on the spectrum of your interest in military business, I think I'll say it this way. I think the good news would be that as we look at, on the COD side, maybe things are going to get marginally better because of interest rate easing and so on and so on. And it's probably going to be a DP3 business as usual military season through essentially peak of next year. So one more almost full cycle before that really ramps up. Yeah.
And I think, and I don't know if you have insight on this, and I know we didn't talk about this, but the DP3 business was significantly down last year, and what the government's saying it was down to versus what other bigger players in the industry felt like it was down. The things that I've been told are ranging from the government saying it was down 10 or 11% to other people in the heavily involved in the military side of things saying it was down 40 or 50%. And nobody, I guess, really knows, but my hope would be that if we do have another full year here in the old system, that it somewhat comes back to an average at least.
From everything I've been at all the meetings, and heard both sides, whether it's the third parties talking about it or the government itself talking about it, Transcom. I don't have any reason to believe that that it would be other than the average for next year, right? I don't know that it's going to be a significant increase per se, but I think I think we can expect the right. And I don't know. The conversation is somewhat timely. There was some news this morning that the holds that were placed on military promotions, I think it was like 400 promotions from generals to lower level colonels and so on, who are going to be taking positions throughout the military that have been filled for a while. I mean, I don't know that's going to be life changing, but all those folks, there's probably a significant number of moves within that group as well. And so that may start things off well
Yeah,
for us.
and I think that's something that when you look at the cycle of money in the economy and how an investment of this much money can replicate further down the line, right? And I think that if those positions do get filled, now there's another position that needs filled and another position behind that, and because whoever they replaced to fill the position, they've now left a position, and then that continues. So I think that that might be 400 positions, but turns into 4,000 moves or something. You know what I mean? So,
Absolutely.
like you said, not necessarily life changing, but might help move that needle a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that would be if those start now, because I think now that dam has broken, they're going to want to get those done quickly as possible. If that starts now, then it's a nice boost as in the off peak to get those done. So yeah, I agree with you.
For sure. So in your estimation, and when we talked about this, I was like, geez, I'd be surprised it now with where they're at and that we haven't started moving test shipments yet, that, if we had 5 or 10% moving before peak, 5 or 10% of moves transitioning to the new system versus the old by come peak. And I think you have a little bit different perspective on that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, I could be wrong. I'm often wrong. I don't know. Just ask my wife. She'll tell you. Yeah. I'll be surprised if it's 5%. I think from the meetings that I've been, a matter of fact, I think you and I were both at IAM. I think there was some significant discussion about the IT piece of all of this, and forget all the other stuff for a minute, the pricing and forget all that, just the IT portion of it. There are some significant work and hurdles to go. And the military, what you and I heard at IM was that shipments simply will not go through the process, test or otherwise, until certain benchmarks have been met. And that there is a reasonable assurance that everything is working essentially perfectly, right? And so that's a really high bar to get to before you can start pumping, up to 5% of a pretty significant number through that system. Yeah. So I don't have any different crystal ball than anyone else does, but I think I'll be surprised if it's 5%.
Yeah, no, and I think that's interesting because they do have to pass the IT piece, which I'm sure is very difficult, and our government doesn't move quickly, right? So that's got to be a process that's difficult to get through, and then you have to run some test shipments, and then at some point start ramping that up, and the calendar. And at the same time, they've also said, hey, if whatever level of transfer we've hit by peak, we're staying at that level. We're not going to increase the amount through peak. So I think you're spot on there. There's so many steps that have to be gone through between now and mid-May that there's just not a lot of time left to crank that percentage up. So.
And by the way, I'll say one other thing too is I mean, I think there's a tendency to think if GHC is inevitable and at some point it's going to be implemented, then there's probably folks who are saying, okay, well, if we can work all this other stuff out, let's get on with it or what have you. But I think it would be a disaster for us in the industry if they did move forward with a system that wasn't working ready. The way that it should. I think that would cause so much, concern and confusion. And by the way, I mean, as we all say, the military members would suffer for it. And so there's all kinds of reasons to go slowly with it. Again, aside from all the stuff that we're vetting right now.
Right. For sure. So, okay. Well, I appreciate you enlightening us, or at least trying to shed some light. And I think some people are, obviously people are nervous about the transition. There's a lot of change, and change is not comfortable for people. And, I think we all need time to adjust to that. So I don't think anyone is super upset if it takes a little longer to implement. If we can get another summer out of the old system, that
Right.
helps at least give us an opportunity to take the time to make those changes. So, well, very good, AJ. So are there any other future nuggets or anything else you want to leave us with here today before we start to close out?
I think we've covered, I mean, really the primary information we talked about was the chicken wing piece. And so I think if you could promote that part, that's really
come cool. Visit Buffalo, come say hi to
me. Right.
And we'll visit all the favorite spots.
Perfect. That's what we need to do, Brian, is do we need to set up a chicken wing tour for our industry. So come to Buffalo, and you go, it's like a drinking tour, but instead it's chicken wings.
There you go. I could be on board for that.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. So AJ Schneider, president of Wheaton Beacons. What if somebody's interested in talking to Vanline, or maybe you want to become an agent or work with you guys in some way, how would they start that conversation? Who would they talk to?
Yeah, I really the two key members of our staff that do intake and field queries in that area are Fred McBroom, who's our vice president of agency development, and Craig Boriani, who's our director of agency recruiting. And if you want to give out my number to help people connect with those two folks, I'm happy to make that connection. We'd love to talk to you and tell you more about our van line.
All right. That sounds great. Listen, AJ, this was fun. I appreciate the time. Funny story, wings, what's the heck's happening in the future here. So I think we covered a lot of good topics. Know you're a busy guy, so really appreciate you. Always fun to talk to you. And I'm sure I will see you at a conference somewhere warm in the near future.
You got it. And thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, AJ.
You bet.
Really appreciate AJ Schneider taking the time to come speak with us. A very, very busy and maybe important guy out there to take the time to come see us. So, definitely really appreciate that. If you want to talk to AJ, his email address is AJ_Schneider, SCHNEIDER @WVLcorp.com. If you're interested in becoming an agent, you can email AJ or Craig Boriani, which is Craig, KREGG _BOREANI @WVLcorp.com. Also Fred McBroom, Fred_McBroom @WVLcorp.com. So we appreciate you guys watching. Thank you for being here. Just want to remind you that we're not only on YouTube, we are also on anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, whether that's Podbean, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcasts, we are there. Go ahead and search for the Movers Resource Guide. Please subscribe, like our stuff. We really appreciate it. If you have any questions or ideas for future episodes or anything you want to contact us about, please send us an email at moversresourceguide@gmail.com. Once again, thank you. Appreciate you joining us today. Now get moving.